is an Ineos Grenadier Quartermaster, and it's a very unusual vehicle. It's built in France with a BMW 6-cylinder engine, and that doesn't sound like the recipe for a workhorse pickup truck, but this is boxy and rugged and capable, and it costs around $90,000. There's a lot to say about the Quartermaster, and today I'm going to review it and show you all of its quirks and features. Before we get started, are you ready for your next cool car? Sell your enthusiast car on Cars and Bids. Trading in your car to dealers means you aren't getting market value for your car, leaving you with less cash for your next fun car. Just look at our recent sales of these cool cars compared to current trade-in value. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is the trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Get started now on carsandbids.com. Sell on Cars and Bids and join the best community to sell your enthusiast car. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Quartermaster, which is the new pickup truck version of the Ineos Grenadier. And before I get started, a big thank you to Mossy Ineos Grenadier, which is our Ineos Grenadier dealership here in San Diego. Mossy has a wide selection of all the latest Ineos vehicles, including a few new Quartermaster pickup trucks, and they were nice enough to let me borrow this one. Thank you to Mossy Ineos. You can check them out with the link in the description below. But let's talk quirks and features. By now, you might know the story of Ineos, a British billionaire and the majority owner of the chemical company Ineos, wistfully misses the old school Land Rover Defender. So he decides to create a modern reinterpretation and names it the Grenadier after the pub where he came up with the idea to create the vehicle in the first place. Now, the Grenadier first came out as an SUV, and I reviewed it about a year and a half ago, but now they've got a truck too, and it's this, the Grenadier Quartermaster. So let's start with the basics. The Quartermaster is debuting for the 25 model year. It's new, and like the regular Ineos Grenadier SUV, it comes standard with four-wheel drive and a center differential lock. Also, like the regular Ineos Grenadier SUV, it has a BMW turbocharged 6-cylinder engine. This is the BMW B58 twin-turbo 6-cylinder, 3 liters, with about 280 horsepower and about 330 pound-feet of torque. Now, you can also find this engine, interestingly, in the BMW Z4, the M340i, the X3 M40i, some kind of sportier vehicles, but it's also in here. And in this vehicle, fuel efficiency is not a priority. Ineos estimates around 12 miles per gallon, owing to the large size and boxy design of the Grenadier. Performance is also not exceptional. This weighs around 5,900 pounds, which is pretty hefty. So 0 to 60 is around 8.5 to 9 seconds, not exactly quick. Now, also like the SUV version of the Grenadier, the Quartermaster is built in France in a town called Hambach, the site of the former smart car factory that's been repurposed to make the Ineos Grenadier a very different vehicle. Now, all of these Quartermaster pickups are 4-door crew cab models. You can only get this body style, and you can only get this bed length. It's a 5-foot bed. No long beds, no short cabs. This is what you get. As for sizing, the Quartermaster is 212.6 inches long, which makes it about 2 feet longer than the SUV version of this truck, but it's about the same size as other mid-size pickup trucks like the Honda Ridgeline or quad cab versions of the Toyota Tacoma. So this is squarely in mid-size truck territory in terms of size, but not in terms of price. The Quartermaster starts around $88,500 for the base model, and it can go up to $96,000 for the top trim version. That is a pretty big jump over the SUV, which starts around $73,000. So this is considerably more expensive than that, and a huge jump over for other mid-size pickup trucks. Even the top trim Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro starts around $64,000. So this is about 25 grand more expensive for the base model than the very best version of the Toyota Tacoma. Now, part of the reason for its high pricing is the famous chicken tax, which is a tariff that was put on foreign-made pickup trucks and cargo vans way back in the 1970s. That tariff was never removed, and it has caused a lot of automakers over a lot of decades to bring their truck production to North America, but Ineos isn't big enough to construct a factory in the States just to sell these Quartermasters, so they're importing it from France, and they're paying a 25% tariff on all the Quartermaster pickups, which is part of the reason why it's so much more expensive than the SUV and more expensive than basically any other pickup truck. But anyway, next up, onto the exterior quirks, starting with the overall styling and design, which you can see is very distinctive, at least by modern standards. So many SUVs have gotten swoopy and soft, but the Grenadier retains the old school, boxy, utilitarian truck look of the old Land Rover Defenders and Toyota Land Cruisers and Nissan Patrols from back in the day. It's one of the few truly boxy, old school SUVs that's left, up there with the G-Wagon, and it's certainly the only one that offers a pickup truck version, which is pretty cool. Now, on the outside, you can see this rail on the roof, which is designed for accessory mounting, which is kind of cool. And next to that, you have a little gutter. Almost looks like a gutter you would find on your house. This is for rain. Exactly the same purpose, actually. It's a rain channel. Rain comes off the roof, comes onto the gutter, and then goes down little channels and drains on the outside of the car, so it doesn't get inside and they can manage where the water flows. Also cool on the outside of this truck, you can see around the bed they've mounted these metal rails, which is kind of neat. You can mount accessories like big lights to them if you want on the top, or when you toss stuff over your bed, it'll protect your bedsides from getting damaged. And frankly, it's just neat to have it on there. It makes the truck look tougher from the rear. Now, one interesting thing on the outside of the Grenadier is all of the subtle, sometimes, and not so subtle, other times, badging that you can find hidden or obvious all around the truck. For example, on this front passenger fender, you have a flag that's sort of a combination of a British flag and a German flag, and that's because Ineos as a company is British, but the powertrain for this truck comes from BMW, which is German, so they've combined those flags into one, since this is sort of the soul of both countries. And in fact, if you look on the hood, you can see this plastic trim has the words "powered by BMW" imprinted on it. You got to look close to see this, but it's there, telling you obviously who makes the powertrain. Now, over on the driver's side of the hood, you can see Grenadier is stamped onto that side into the metal, which gives you a clue about what this vehicle is, since most people approaching it probably wouldn't really know. And also over on this side, you can see there is an Ineos badge in the front quarter panel, where on the passenger side you have that British and German flag logo. So some asymmetrical badging on this truck. In fact, the Ineos logo also appears on the fuel door. You can see it right here. It's sort of hidden into the fuel door, but you can press where the Ineos logo is to open the fuel door, and you always have that little reminder of who made your truck when you're walking up to fuel it. Interestingly, there's also a little plaque below the windshield on the driver's side that lets people know exactly what this truck is, the Ineos Grenadier Quartermaster. It gives the trim level, not a usual place where you see badging, and certainly not a usual place where you see a plaque, but that's what this truck has. Now, the most obvious badging on this truck is around back, where you can see the word Quartermaster is spelled out on the bed. Interestingly, this is only on the driver's side of the bed. The passenger side does not say Quartermaster, but it's printed here, and actually the whole trim leveling situation for this truck is a bit confusing, because the various trims of the truck and SUV are called Fieldmaster and Trialmaster, and they're different versions with different equipment. But then Quartermaster is a completely different body style, so you can get a Fieldmaster Quartermaster, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but that's what they're sticking with. Now, on the tailgate, you can also see an Ineos badge in the corner, and then a Grenadier right down the center, stamped into the metal like an old school pickup truck, telling you exactly what it is that you're following behind in traffic, which is kind of cool. Also worth pointing out, yet another badge, this one just a decal on the rear window. You can see now the French flag our third flag on the vehicle, along with the words "Built in Hambach" to let us know exactly where this vehicle was built. So we have all three flags represented here: Britain and Germany on the quarter panel, and then France on the back for the production. A lot of flags the Grenadier flies under. But anyway, next we move on to the bed. Now, interestingly, the tailgate isn't power operated. In fact, it's not even soft open. You pull on the latch and then it just drops open. And when you get into the bed, you quickly discover that this vehicle doesn't have a lot of the typical bed accessories that many American market pickups are equipped with. For instance, you don't have a household style power outlet in here or a large 240 volt outlet either. You do have a little 12 volt outlet, but that's not really going to cut it compared to a lot of pickup truck rivals that can power tools or even washing machines from their bed. You also don't have like special auxiliary lighting back here that you can turn on for extra visibility. There's no in tailgate storage situation or a step that drops down for you to climb in. You're missing some of that stuff. With that said, you do have a spare tire mounted in the bed, which is a pretty good thing because a lot of pickups mount the tire under, which can be hard to get out, but in this truck it's right here and easily available. Now, it does steal some bed space for you, but that's a trade-off you'll have to decide on. You can, of course, remove the tire if you want. Also kind of nice back here is that inside the spare tire you have a little storage compartment. This plastic panel that says Grenadier, it locks, and if you unlock it and open it up, you have storage in this unused spot in the middle of the tire where you can put kind of smaller items if you don't want them rolling around in the bed. That is a nice little Quartermaster in-bed touch. As for capability, the Quartermaster is pretty impressive. It has at max 10.3 inches of ground clearance. Now, that's not as much as the Tacoma TRD Pro, which is a little over 11 inches, but it's a pretty good number for a mid-size pickup truck. Should make this pretty capable off-road. The Quartermaster can also tow more than 7,700 pounds, which is a huge figure for a mid-size truck. By comparison, the Tacoma in all versions maxes out around 6,500 pounds. And the payload capacity here is around 1,850 pounds, which is also quite an impressive overall figure for a mid-sized truck. You can really load it down if you need to. And next up, we move inside the Quartermaster, which is quite a Quirkfest. But first, we begin with the key, which is an old-school folding key. It looks squarish and tough, and you unfold it, insert it in the ignition, and twist. No push-button stuff going on here. Now, the key has 3 buttons on it. You can see lock, unlock, and then the Ineos button in the center. That's actually the alarm. If you press that, it'll start going off incredibly loudly. It is unlabeled, but don't push the Ineos button. Anyway, climb inside, and the first thing you notice in here is you have a very distinctive interior in this truck. Very different from most other vehicles, particularly at this price point. And that's largely because, well, the center control stack is absolutely full of old school buttons and dials instead of your usual touch screen or slider controls. You also have basically no swooping, curving elements in here. Everything in this truck is upright, right angles, intended to be off-roady and tough looking and feeling. This is utility, toughness, ruggedness. So you have squares and right angles everywhere. You have exposed screws all around the interior, especially in the center console and the center control stack. It's tough, with the exception of the gear selector, because that comes straight from BMW, who supplies the powertrain and the transmission. So the gear selector is right out of an X3, and it's very smooth and curvy to fit perfectly in the palm of your hand. I'm sure that Ineos wishes they could change that, but since they get the part from BMW, it's what they come with, and so it really looks out of place in this otherwise rugged, masculine interior. But anyway, on to some specifics. Let's start with that center control stack, where again, it is all old school buttons, switches, and dials. Now, most of the stuff in this control stack adjusts your climate controls. You can see like your fan speed, your temperature control, air positioning, that sort of stuff is all in here. Plus, you also have individual buttons for the seat heating for driver and passenger side. Now, below that, there's a few other things. You can control your audio volume, for instance, mute it by pressing the center, start, stop. Probably the most hilarious control here in the center control stack is the hazard lights, which is in a very dramatic place, surrounded by these two silver hoops and then this diagonal trim around the hazard light switch, just to make sure you really know that you're pressing the hazard lights if you push it. Now, if you look up in this vehicle, in the Quartermaster, you will notice a massive roof panel that is again filled with physical controls. Just like you have in the center control stack, there's even more controls up above you, above the front seats. And there's all sorts of different stuff. Some of the controls closest to you are switches that turn on various auxiliary items if you want to install them, and an auxiliary battery that you can install for accessories. You also have various off-road controls here. You can see kind of an off-roading mode and a waiting mode that are accessible with these physical push buttons, and you have a downhill assist, auxiliary exterior lights, basically all sorts of controls here. You will also notice that there's a little image of the Quartermaster that shows its overall width and overall height in both meters and inches, which is a pretty handy guide, just in case you're worried, am I going to get stuck in here? Am I too wide? Am I too tall? You can take a quick look at that and see exactly how big the car is, and so you'll know, hey, maybe I shouldn't go into that area. Now, also worth pointing out, flanking this massive roof-mounted control panel, you also have two individual sunroofs, as you can see, one over the driver's seat and another over the passenger seat. Now, these sunroofs can be very easily opened up to vent to allow some airflow in the interior, which is a pretty cool idea, and you can do that independently. So driver can do theirs, passenger doesn't have to, or vice versa, or they can do both. It's pretty cool. But these panels can also be completely removed if you so choose. They don't just slide back into the roof like a typical sunroof. You have to physically take them out, and when you do, the Quartermaster comes with this nifty Ineos branded carrying case where you can put your glass roof panels and store them, so you keep them with the truck, and so you can easily reinstall them if it starts to rain or whatever, and you want to get them back in place. Overall, it's a pretty cool solution for a sunroof. Not as easy or convenient as a push-button power sunroof, but kind of neat to split it into two pieces, which you don't normally see. Now, despite all of the physical controls in this vehicle, the massive controls and dials in the center stack, and this whole panel above your head in the front seat, you still do have a touchscreen in here because there's just too much stuff. You gotta have a screen. And in fact, the touchscreen in the Grenadier and the Quartermaster is incredibly important because it's not just a screen, it also has all of your typical gauge cluster functions. If you look at this screen, you will notice this is where you see your speed. Your speedometer is located here. So is your tachometer. It also shows what gear you're in, your current fuel level, engine temperature, your odometer. All the stuff you'd normally find in your gauge cluster is mounted here on the left side of the screen towards the driver. And that's because where the gauge cluster usually is just a little panel of warning lights. This is like where your turn signals turn on, or the light letting you know you don't have on your seatbelt, or if you have some fault in the vehicle. They're all here in this panel instead of an actual gauge cluster, which is unusual. It's kind of weird to look to the side to see all that stuff, but it no doubt simplifies Grenadier production. When they have to switch left-hand drive and right-hand drive, they don't have to do as much creating of multiple things since the center screen stays the same in both markets. Now, also integrated into this center screen, you can see obviously your audio controls are in here, your phone and Bluetooth, and your vehicle settings are all integrated in the screen. And there's also an off-road tab in here, which you can use to pull up all sorts of different off-road information, like letting you know your current temperature status, other off-roading statistics. It's all located right here in the center screen. Now, one cool thing directly below the center screen, you can see this little circular dial here. This is not a clock, but instead it is a compass, which is pretty cool. And there's a little screen inside the compass, which at all times tells you your current compass heading and your current altitude, which is kind of neat to see displayed right there. It's what you'd expect from an adventure vehicle. Now, also interesting is the steering wheel, which has its own group of controls on it, but none is more unusual than the two separate horns. Okay, check this out. The main horn is in the center of the steering wheel like most other cars. You press it and it's loud. But there's also a secondary horn, which is this little red button over here. It's marked Toot, and it shows a picture of a bicycle. And if you push that, well, it's quieter. Take a listen. The thinking here is that you would use the main horn if there's an emergency, you're about to hit somebody, you're trying to stop them from crashing into you, but you would use your little red toot horn if you just want to let a bicycle know that you're passing or something and you don't want to create such a loud sound from your main horn. So you have two different horn notes and you get to decide which one is warranted by the situation where you're honking. Now, also on the steering wheel, you can see your cruise control stuff over off to the left, along with some phone buttons. And on the right, you have your typical audio controls. You can see volume, next track, etc. Now, behind the steering wheel, you have your fairly typical signal stalk over on the left side, which also has your headlight controls on it. And on the right side, you have your windshield wiper stalk. Nothing particularly unusual or surprising there. With that said, some other interesting quirks in here. Let's talk storage. I really like the fact that you have under-seat storage in this vehicle. You can see the seats are mounted on kind of a pedestal, and so this spot here can be used for kind of extra storage, like if you want to put tools in there or other kind of smaller items you don't have a great place for, they can be easily accessible right under your seat, which is a neat spot. Also interesting for storage, the center console, it opens up, of course, it's a storage compartment, and it locks, which is nice to see. Now that's a surprise because the glove box does not lock. It does open up and you can put storage stuff in there, but there's no lock on the glove box. If you want to lock something up nice and tight, you'll have to use the locking center console storage instead. Now, also over on the passenger side, next to the glove box, you will notice that in the dashboard, there is a handle. This is called a grab handle, and it is a tried and true off-roader tradition, something for the passenger to grab onto if you're in some really unsteady terrain, they're getting knocked around, you got your grab handle, you can hold on for dear life while you're doing some serious off-roading. Now, in the area around this handle, you will notice the materials are not exactly the most high-end. You don't really have upscale luxury touches in here. You got some fairly cheap looking and feeling plastic instead, which is a surprise considering, like I told you before, the base price of this truck is around $89,000. That's a lot of money, and it only buys you the base model with the base trim and amazingly manual seats. You do not get power seats in the $89,000 Quartermaster. You just get manual adjustments for front seats, no power control at all, which is a surprise. Now, if you upgrade to higher trim level versions of this truck, obviously you get more stuff, more equipment, including front and rear locking differentials, bigger off-roading tires, and various other things. All of that stuff is available in higher trims, but then you start to get well over $90,000, which is obviously pretty big money for any pickup truck, especially one that's roughly the same dimensions as a Tacoma. And next we move on to the back seat in the Quartermaster, which is fine in terms of size. It's not exactly huge back here. You don't have a huge amount of leg room or knee room. I got the front seat position about where I would sit, and my knees are just pushing into it. My head is right up against the ceiling. It's tight, but it's doable. The real drawback back here is actually the angle of the seat backs. You can see they're basically 90 degrees, almost completely upright, owing to the vertical upright design of the rear end of the passenger compartment. The seats aren't exactly the most comfortable for that reason. You don't have a ton of space, and you don't really get to sit reclined at all. It's just pretty tight. With that said, it's fairly typical of mid-size pickup trucks to have seats about this position, so it's not really that big of a surprise, but don't expect Ford Raptor style comfort back here. Now, in back, you don't have an enormous amount of creature comforts, but you do have the important basics. Specifically, you got two climate vents back here for rear passengers, which is nice, and below that, you have two different power ports. You can see one USB-A and one USB-C, which is also nice. A household outlet back here would be good as well, but unfortunately, you don't have that in this truck. Now, one other kind of drawback in the back seat is that there's no storage underneath the seat bottoms where you typically do find storage in other pickup trucks. That's not the case here. You can fold down the seat back, which reveals kind of a hard plastic surface on the back side where you could put wet or dirty items or a wet or dirty pet or anything you wanted to throw in here if you didn't want it to get the seats damaged, but you don't have an actual closing storage compartment in back. With that said, it's kind of nice to see you fold the seats back and you can see a hydraulic jack mounted back here, which is obviously pretty useful in the off-roading world. If you need to lift up the truck for any reason, get a tire change, nice to have a place to put that and nice to see it's included from the factory. But your probably wondering how this drives. The BMW-powered, French-built, British off-roader pickup truck. So let's get behind the wheel and find out. All right, driving the Ineos Grenadier Quartermaster, or as it's better known in my sphere, the pickup one. This is actually the perfect day to be driving this vehicle because it is pouring rain here in San Diego, and it just feels a little bit more correct to be driving this British vehicle in the rain, this like off-road, very capable vehicle in a setting where you might actually need some of its capabilities. Not that rain on the freeway is exactly that, but it's the best we can do in San Diego. Now, I drove the original, the Grenadier SUV, and I was impressed with it. I understood a lot of the complaints that people have with these vehicles. You know, they're boxy and utilitarian and not particularly comfortable, and there's all sorts of other little things. However, as a guy who has owned old G-Wagons, old Defenders, all those vehicles, it really speaks to me. And I think that if you're going into this expecting the experience to be like a Lexus or, you know, a Land Rover or something like that, you're going to be disappointed. But if you are an old SUV guy, an old SUV enthusiast, this is the old SUV of the modern era. And so I think that this vehicle in large part is all about perspective. If old SUVs are something that appeal to you and you feel that all of the modern SUVs and pickups in this case kind of lack the benefits that you enjoyed from the old trucks and SUVs, this is for you. If you're looking for a Range Rover but boxier, you're going to definitely lose some of that in this vehicle because it just doesn't quite have that feel. Now, I will say though, in terms of ride quality and interior comfort, it's actually pretty good. You know, I drive a Toyota Sequoia body on frame. This is definitely more comfortable than that in terms of like going over bumps and ride quality. I also find it to be relatively quiet in here. It's not incredibly quiet, and it could certainly be quieter, but it's better than like an old Defender or the kind of vehicles that this is kind of modeled after. And in that sense, it's definitely a more usable, kind of more luxurious, more comfortable thing. The big drawback, I think, about the Grenadier, and it's clearly true in the pickup too, is the steering. The big complaint has been that the steering doesn't really re-center. Like when you make a turn, you have to kind of push it back to center, which is true, and that's a little bit unnerving and a little bit weird. But it's not just that. The truck, the SUV, both of them have a tendency to wander a little bit on the freeway. Sustained cruising at speed is not necessarily the big thing with this vehicle. I would say it's not necessarily like what this vehicle is really for. And I find myself, even on a fairly straight freeway situation, kind of constantly having to trim the steering, which isn't necessarily what you're looking for. And then there are some kind of weird driver aids too, like the one that just turned on is when you go over the speed limit, it starts to warn you, which is fine, but I guess you have to turn it off whenever you get in the car, and that's honestly really kind of annoying. I will say for a pickup truck, this is surprisingly comfortable. I've done a lot in this video comparing this to a Tacoma and other mid-sized trucks, but obviously it's more expensive and also more luxurious. It is a much nicer ride than a Toyota Tacoma of any variety, and that's true of basically all the trucks. This one clearly has like a nicer, more upscale experience to give you. Now, does it justify as significant of a price point increase as it has? That's for you to decide, but it definitely feels nicer than all of those other mid-sized trucks from an interior standpoint, from a driving experience standpoint, everything. Overall, I am actually pretty impressed with this. The powertrain is good. That's another thing that's nice about these. I don't entirely find the powertrain to be that suited to the vehicle. It's weird to have like a turbo 6-cylinder and a fairly comfortable, like smooth one. Like this deserves like a bigger engine or a diesel, but this is what you got and it works well. It's a good powertrain. I think the seating position is nice. I think your drawbacks are sort of interior noise and the steering situation, and then obviously the price tag, which is definitely not going to work for a lot of people. But it's a niche vehicle for a niche audience, and I think the niche audience who likes this vehicle and who's into this vehicle will never find another car quite like this one on the market today. And for that makes it a pretty desirable vehicle for this crowd. And so that's the Ineos Grenadier Quartermaster. It looks cool and it's reasonably capable, but it has a surprisingly high price tag, especially considering the level of equipment and performance it offers. This will find a home among rich guys who want to project the image of working the land on their ranch. It's not a huge segment, but there are some. And now it's time to give the Quartermaster a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 52 out of 100, which puts the Quartermaster here against some relatively comparable trucks. The Quartermaster does well in the weekend categories thanks to its attractive styling, cool vibes, and impressive off-road capabilities, but in the daily categories it earns the lowest score on this list. That's because it's not as comfortable or as spacious as a Raptor, or as well equipped as a Ram RHO, or as practical as most of the other mid-sized trucks, and the price tag is very high. For some buyers, none of that will matter, as the Quartermaster's coolness will rise above all else, but I suspect there won't be very many of those people.